Hello everyone, I hope you're all well. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Now what I thought I'd do this time is, often when I do some snippets, I'll sometimes get a couple of questions or reasons, asking reasons why I didn't do certain things. So sometimes every now and then I like to do a long follow-up video just to answer some questions and show how you can take the snippets further. So these are snippets 23 and 24 that you will see on my YouTube video. They're both there, and it'll say snippet 23 and snippet 24. And I want to just go further with these ideas. Right, so first of all, I've got a piece of card 4 by 6 inches, which is exactly the same size as the snippet. And what I've done is I've put a piece of 4 inch by 6 inch card underneath the gel press, because then whatever I put on the gel press, I can line this up to then go straight exactly where I want it to go. Right, the gel press has still got some oxide ink on there, so I'm just going to give that a little bit of a wipe, just so that it's not overpowered by one colour. And I can tell because I've just put me hands on the gel press. So just giving the gel press a little bit of a wipe. I don't normally bother, but I do if I've put oxides on there. And then what I'll do is I'll just take a piece of copier paper and just mop up that moisture. There we go. You can see how much ink was on there. Grab another piece of kitchen roll. Right, so I'm going to do exactly the same process, but show you how you can take it further and explain a few reasons behind things. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to use my stencil, Elongated Hearts. In the last ones I used squares for my masking off piece. So what I'm going to do this time is use my stencil to give me a heart. Now it's up to you which way you have the heart. I'm going to have it this way. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the stencil just to draw around that heart. Now the heart is distressed. That's the way it's supposed to be, just so that it gives you a little bit of a different look than a standard heart. So the stencil is Elongated Heart and it's 156. Right. What I'm going to do then is take my scissors, just pierce through the paper and just cut around the inside line. Now, some of you will be saying, well, Tracy, why can't you use the stencil? Because the stencil has got other things on there, and also it's got a lip on there, so I just want to have a piece of paper on there. So first of all I'm creating a stencil. The aperture bit, because if I want to stamp through this aperture bit, I can't do that with the stencil. If I want to I can with a background stamp. So we'll just explain this. Let's just cut this out first. So just cutting this out. Do you know, I've been so hot all day. And because I'm a woman of a certain age, I'm even hotter than normal. So I'm just going to open my window, which of course is locked, but we're going to have to open it. There we go. Oh, fresh air. So you might hear the birds singing. So if I want to stamp through the stencil, I can stamp through it with background stamps, no problem at all. If I want to stamp through with a focal image that I want to go right to the edge, you've got this lip, you've got some depth to your stencil. So sometimes a cutout of copy paper, because then it won't give me that broken line because of that lip. When you're doing background stamping, it doesn't matter so much, but if you have got a flower or something, you might miss the edge of it with that lip. So what I'm going to do then is, that one won't work, so we've got the stencil there, and then I want the aperture. So I'm just going to cut that heart out again. And when I'm doing the longer videos, I tend to do every element in the video. So there's no prep, it's all done so that you can see every process. And also so I can answer those questions that I've been asked during the process of the snippets. Now the snippets, the idea behind the snippets is that they are snippets of ideas that you can then take further, keep them as I have done, or take them further. It's entirely up to you how you want to use those snippets. But the idea of the snippets is that if you've only got a short window of time, you can still create something and still be pleased with what you've created, even in that short amount of time. Not everybody's got hours and hours to spare for creating, so it's nice to cater for everybody. Also, some people watch YouTube, some people don't. Let's just, okay, right, so now let's just cut this down so that it doesn't drive us mad. There we go. I've now got the aperture the same as the stencil that's got no lip, because copy paper, it's completely flat. There's no thickness to the card. I'm going to do exactly the same processes now that I did in my snippet. So in my snippets, I used a square piece of copy paper and a smaller square piece of copy paper. And what I did is I placed the copy paper on to my gel press. My gel press is 5x7. I've got that piece of 4x6 card underneath, so I can see exactly where I want to place this. You can place it there, you can place it in the centre, it's entirely up to you. So I'm going to have mine here, and because it's copy paper, it sits on that gel press nicely, and it sits flat on the gel press, which is what we need. It sort of sucks in to the gel press. Now when I was doing my demo, what I did was I took the blue ink pad and I pressed that all over the gel press, just as I'm doing now. This colour is speckled egg. I'm changing the colours just so that you can see you get a different look. Not all over, but I've added areas of the speckled egg. I'm then going to add some old paper. It's just to give me a little bit of a different colour palette. So there's some old paper on there. Then I'm going to use salvaged patina. And then I'll use a little touch of the Uncharted Marina. Now, what I did with my snippets is I spritzed the gel press with water on one of the videos to activate those inks. And on the other one, I had a solid colour. This, I've got different layers of colour. So I'm just going to dab just some of the squares, just so the squares don't appear on my project. You can use your brayer if you wish. I'm just using whatever I've got to hand. Now what I did was I'm going to add more water and probably more colour, because I actually like the old paper is just a lovely colour. So I'm just going to add a little bit more of that. So you can keep messing with this as much as you want, but what you want to do is make sure that you've got no lines. If you've got lines, use your brayer to roll those lines out if you've got that on your project. So you can use your brayer if you wish. Then I'm just going to add, because I decided then there wasn't enough colour. So I spritzed it. This was how I did the snippet. And what I did with the snippet was, I then took the card and placed it over the top. And then a lady said to me, why didn't you remove the heart before you placed the card over the top? And I didn't, because I knew that the copier paper is very absorbent and that the ink would absorb into the copier paper and it wouldn't make a print on my card. So that was fine, and that's exactly how I did the snippets. I placed the card down while the square was in place, or whatever aperture piece you're creating. I literally placed that on top and took the print. You can also, it makes no difference, you can take your piece off. Take that piece off. So it makes no difference if you used or you don't, but I can touch this and that colour isn't on there. So it works absolutely fine. The blue that I've got on my finger is from the Uncharted. You know, when I went over the gel press? But this itself it's got no ink on it. It doesn't transfer the ink because it's so absorbent. So that's one of the questions I wanted to answer. So that's the reason I kept the heart in place, kept the square in place on the previous snippets and just took my print. I'm just showing you now, it doesn't matter whether you keep the heart in place or not. It would if you used a thicker piece of card that's less absorbent. This is super absorbent, so leaves no trace of ink on there. So now I can also see where the 4 by 6 inch piece of card is. So I can just place that exactly where I want to, because I've got that underneath and I can see where I need to print. There we go. And if you don't want to touch something and you've got ink around the outside edges, just use your copier paper, or you can use another piece of card just to pick up that excess ink that's around the outside edge, because that then will make you a frame, which you can then use in a project. So you could use that as a frame piece. So if you want, take a print, do a piece of card 5 by 7, and you'll have that frame on the 5 by 7, and you can create a card inside. And of course, a tractor's come past now, just as we're talking. Oh, typical Tracy household. There we go. So then you've got the aperture of your heart inside the card. And what we're going to do is we're just going to cut another piece, because this is what it's about being. Let's just cut another piece. So I've cut another piece now because I want to show you again. So there's your print, which looks beautiful, that we can work on. Now I'm going to do it exactly as I did in the snippet. So let's place the heart just. Now obviously you've got a heart here that I'm going to faff with. It's copier paper, and it has got some layers of ink on, but that doesn't matter, you know, it means that obviously it's less absorbent. But what we're going to do is do the same again. So I'm going to start with the old paper, and this time I'm pressing a little bit harder with those ink pads, a little bit harder on this one than I did the last one. So that is the speckled egg. We did old paper first, speckled egg, and selvage patina. And it's great because I can still see that piece of card underneath. And what I'm going to do is spritz, like I did before, the card, the gel press with water. And what we're going to do is just wipe around and underneath the gel press because I've just got water everywhere. So let's just pick that gel press up and just wipe a little bit of that moisture. But you can see I've still got that heart in place, and it's great having that piece of card underneath because you can judge where to put your card. What I'm going to do then is cut a piece of card 5 by 7. Let's do that. Or, oh my God, let's do, yeah, let's do 5 by 7. But this is exactly why I do a selection of videos for you for different reasons. So this is how I did the snippet. I left the heart in place. Well, in that case, it was a square. I left it in place, didn't remove it, and placed this over the top. Okay. And then I've got a 5 by 7 piece of card. And let's see if that frame will work. So let's just mop up all our ink. And what I love about the oxide inks, or the, you know, I prefer the oxide inks to the Distress normal inks because they've got an opaque quality. But look what you've got. On the 5 by 7 inch piece of card, you've now got a frame that you can then create another project with. So it's just taking the technique a little bit further that I showed you in the snippet. There you go. Now let me show you the difference. So what we can do now, we'll go back to that in a second. We've got this frame around here, but if we want, let's dab up some of the excess colour that's on the gel press just to add to our background, and I can create something with that, definitely. Right, let's have a little chat now. So we don't need the gel press anymore, and let's have a chat. So these are the backgrounds. So the only difference is when you keep the mask in place and obviously add some water, you can get a little bit of feathering inside the mask that you've left in place, but that's fine because they both add to the project. But as you can see, because the copy paper is very absorbent, it doesn't make that much difference at all. But I wanted to show you that because I had a question about the snippet, and there I've answered the question just so that we know. Right, we've got 2 of these now. So what we can do is we can add a little bit of the background stamping and see which one we prefer. We can go around the edges and add a little bit more colour. We can do that afterwards. So I've now got the aperture to go over, turn it round Tracy, to go over the area of the heart. Okay, right, where are we? Stamps. So you can decide then if you want to use one of your stamps through the aperture of the heart. So you can take your flowers if you want, and we can add part of the flower through the heart and then add that flower afterwards as well. So I'll take my Cosmos and you see, and also with these, I am not in a rush to finish in 15 minutes because the snippets are designed for those of you that have only got a short amount of time to create. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my black ink and I'm going to use the Cosmos, which does help if I tell you which stamp I'm using, doesn't it? You'll have to excuse me because my brain's not working. So I'm using my Flower Trio, which is 924, which was released on Create and Craft. What are we on now? Sunday. It was released this last week just gone on Create and Craft on the Monday and the Tuesday. So I think it's still available on Create and Craft now. This one may have sold out, but I know the bundle's available. I haven't got a date yet when they're available from stockists. I have asked Abs, so hopefully I'll get the information for you shortly. So this is the flower trio, and I'm using this flower here. And what I'm going to do is just ink up my floral. Now, if I use the stencil and place that on here, that will just mean that because of this edge of the stencil, I might not get a perfect print of the flower if it hits the edge. But because I've got copy paper, it will. But when I'm using a background stamp, it doesn't matter. So let's just, did I ink up a bit of that text as well? This is where I move my stamp around 25 million times, deciding what area I want of the stamp. Do I want it that way or that way? See, I'm hoping you faff as much as I do. Now, because I've created that aperture and I've made sure I've got some area around the aperture, that just protects my card. And again, just allowing that ink just to sit on there, and I can use the acrylic blocks just to lift that up. And what you then get is it goes right up to the heart. So it just means that you don't miss any of the heart. You don't miss any of the flower. So what you can do then is, do we want to add, we can take our, which one do I want? This is where I spend ages deciding. So I'm going to take one of the A7 stamps. Now I don't know whether I want, yes I do. So I'm going to take my Paper Leaves stamp, which is stamp set 930, again part of the new release. And what I'm going to do is use some grey ink. So these demonstrations take me a lot longer because some are off the cuff and some I go into a lot more detail. So there's some text on this little aster flower. Let me just make sure that we've got that stencil over the top. I'm just going to add a little bit of the text just to the background. And because I'm using that grey, I can even use some in the flower, which I love because the text is so fine, it's not overpowering the background. So I can add little bits of the text. And I prefer to take the ink pad to the stamp just so that I don't get the flower as well. And you can use your first generation, second generation, third generation. It just creates depth in your design. But because this text is so fine, it doesn't matter that I also stamp into the flower. Let's just stamp this here and here. So when you remove that, that fine text doesn't take anything away from that flower. Now let me just bring in the other background so I can show you. Remember when I said to you, when you're doing a background stamp with the stencil, it's absolutely fine if you use the stencil with background text, because it doesn't matter if you miss some of that text because it's just random. But you have to press really hard, and if you use an acrylic block, it stops you getting, because this lip here on the stencil, it stops you getting right in the heart. So you just need to be aware of that when you're using a stencil. You can still stamp all the way through it, no problem at all, but you just need to make sure that if you're using it with an acrylic block, you're not going to get it right to the edge. I'm using this background stamp off the acrylic block so I can get it right to the edge of the stencil, so it doesn't affect the stamping. You can get it right to the edge. So I just want you to make aware of that. So that's why I did the copier paper. Right. My hands are so dirty. Right. So what I'm going to do then is let's go around our heart just with an Inktense pencil. So this Inktense pencil, and you don't have to be precise, it's a distressed heart, so don't worry about it being too perfect. I'm just going to make sure that that brush is clean. I love how everybody, you know, it's not been noisy at all day. Tracy decided to do a video and the birds have decided they're in full song. So they're in full song, the farmer's out cutting the edges. Why couldn't he do them in the day? No, he decides whenever Tracy does a video, let's have a party with the tractor. Always the case. I can't make it up, honestly. Even if I put a sign in the close, please don't make any noise, I'm recording, they'd still forget, just like my children. So what I'm doing then is just going to add a little bit of that colour. So I'm starting with the China ink, which is the grey colour. There you go. So I'm just adding a little bit more to that heart. Let me just have a look at this again. This is how I spend my life. Let's just bring that piece of copier paper in again. And it's just a piece of copier paper, so I can use it over and over. But let me see if we get the flower again. And because I've cut out more, I don't need to mask off the card because I've got more paper around the outside. So I can turn this. And let's just have a little bit of the flower there as well. So when you've got your stamp in your hand, obviously you can manipulate it and press it a little bit harder. And obviously some people have got dexterity problems, so that's why I like to use the acrylic block, because you can lever that stamp. And then you've got the flower there as well. So it works rather nicely. So I'm just going to add a little bit more darkness just around the heart. Just a little bit more darkness. I don't press on very hard. It's called Chinese ink, Chinese ink, I think. The Inktense pencil, the grey. And it's just going to give me my shading. And I tend to use just a little bit of that water. I don't tend to drown my brush with water. It's easy to add rather than take away. So this is then going to give us our flowers. So what I'm going to do then, so I'm going to take which colour? I rather like the Salvage Patina, so I'm going to take a little bit more of the Salvage Patina, and I'm just going to make sure that that brush has not got any of that muddy grey in there. because you don't want to make your colours a shade of anything. You don't want them to be muddy. And then I'm just going to add a little bit more of the Salvage Patina just around the card. I'm not touching that grey, I'm just going sort of a little bit round it. Just adding it a little bit round. There we go. Just to add a little bit more of that colour, which I rather like. I also like the old paper. Do you know, I've not used that for a long time, and now I can't get enough of it. Isn't it usually the case? You find a colour and you think, yes, I really like that. So I've just added a little bit more of that around there. Right, let's grab our Inktense pencils. But first of all, we'll grab another one of my background stamps. We're going to grab the Bulb Gazette. So we'll take the Bulb Gazette, which is not that one. Why do you always pick the wrong one up, Tracy? Let's place that back. Oh, do you know, it'd be dangerous if I just had half a brain. There we go. So then I'm going to use the Bulb Gazette, which is 907. And I just love this one when it's stamped in the grey, the Morning Mist. So I'm going to add a little bit of the stamping, and I'm just going to extend the stamping outside the heart, which, Tracy, you hardly added any there. That's better. So I'm just adding a little bit of the text now outside the heart, and if I curl the stamp, I can just get a more random feel to it, so it's not all in straight lines or anything. We don't want lots of straight lines. Beautiful. It's just a beautiful stamp for creating a wonderful, wonderful backdrop. It really makes me happy, this stamp does. It's very forgiving as well. You know, when you miss areas, it's one of those stamps that's very forgiving. So what I'm doing is I'm adding text sort of around the heart, just so that the heart looks like it's embedded into the page with the text. There we go. Just a wonderful stamp. And you hardly have to touch it, and you just get a bit of that ink. And even say you want to get right close to the heart, it's just so forgiving. You can overstamp, and it's just really forgiving, just so you can see some of that. Just beautiful. Right, we'll decide if we want more afterwards, but let's just give that little water brush a bit of a clean. And then I'm going to get my Inktense pencils. Now these are the new colours that Inktense brought out. So I want a bright orange and then a reddy colour. Let's move that out of the way. So I'm going to use Wildflower 0313. This light's making my eyes go funny. And 0330 Persian Red. Just to add some colour to my project. Let's just bring that flower in. There we go. So there is some colour there. See, because obviously you've only got part of the flower. So I've got that. Yeah, it's all can be coloured. Yes, I talk to myself, I know. It goes in better if I talk to myself. But where's that? But can you imagine? Oh, pick it up. If we add some background stamp into that. I'm going to make a card with that, definitely. Because I think that's lovely, that background. So I'm using the, was it Persian red? Persian red. And I'm adding my darkest colour first. Just. And really professionally, just scribbling that on. And for me, the Inktense pencils work far better if you layer your colour. What I'm going to do then is, if I was using alcohol markers, I'm just going to blend the red, the edges of the red, with the orange colour, which was Wild Flame. Does that say Wild Flame? Yes. I have to ask myself, because in this light my eyes, they're failing. Just like my body. But there you go. So just add some of that colour. And what I love about the Inktense pencils is they just come to life. So what I'm going to do is start at the edge where it's empty and bring in the water. And I'm not touching that top area yet. I'm just blending the bottom of the orange colour out so that I keep some of the lightness. So I'm just blending, and I will do one flower at a time. Obviously, don't put enough water down, Tracy. So just blending out the colour. At the moment, this is what I just call a wash of colour. So just blending out the edges of that orange, which looks nothing at all. So what I'm going to do then is go further in to the colour, so that the darkest of the colour is right inside this centre area, so it's got the darkest colour. And this is just what I call my first layer of colour. So I'm just pushing the darkest colour to the centre. I'm not dragging that dark colour out, I'm just pushing it to the centre. And at the moment, that doesn't give me enough brightness or depth. It just gives me my first layer of colour. Now what I'm going to do now is sacrilege. I'm going to go into my pencil, my red one. Now you have to remember, these are not woodless pencils like the Tim Holtz pencils. So when you touch this with water, your paintbrush, your water brush cannot be sodden or soaking wet. But I like to pick up a little bit more of the pigment and just add some of that rich pigment for a little bit more richness of colour, just to that flower. So picking up the darkest colour, which in this case is that red colour, reddy orange. So just picking up that colour. I'm also a great believer that if you let a card rest, you can add layers of colour better if it's allowed to rest than if you keep trying to work the card when it's soaking wet. Let me just get rid of that red so that we don't corrupt the colour that we're going to use. Then I'm going to go to the orange colour, and I'm just going to add and blend those two colours out. And then I'm just going to give those colours some time just to rest, just so that I don't break the fibres down on that card too quickly. And then I won't be able to do anything else with it. So at the moment, this is what we've got. And then what I want to do, where's my stamp? I always like to use the acetate. So I love to use the acetate and decide whether I want to add the flower on its own as well, without the circle, just the flower. So we'll just place that on one side and we'll just grab a piece of card. And this is, you know, one of the advantages of these videos is there's no time constraints. I don't need the circle. So there's no time constraints to this one. And you can fast forward as much as you want through all my waffle. I'm just going to add that flower once again. And again, even just on the white card, I'm not racing or rushing that stamping process. I'm still giving it time just to soak into the card. And it's a nice easy stamp to stamp with, to be fair. I thought I'd hardly touch the circle. I didn't intend in having the circle. But let's just give that a blot. My daughter has moved into a new flat again. So she moved back home, I think it was something like September last year, and she's moved back out again to live in her flat, to be near her work in the city. And it's hilarious because every 2 minutes my phone is going, how does this work? Oh, where can I get this from? Oh, I'm going on holiday and I've got no scales. How do I weigh me suitcase? And it's been like this constant all day. And I even had a message to say, oh, my bed's much easier to make, because when we decorated her bedroom, I do things like, you know, I make the bed and it's got a duvet, a sheet to protect the duvet, then a fitted sheet on the bed, and then it has a throw, and then it has cushions. And Laura says to me, for goodness sake, I don't know how to make the bed. It's like an exam. So she messaged me today and said, oh, it's so easy to make my bed, Mum. What she means is she can just chuck the duvet over, because all she's got is a duvet cover and this bottom sheet, so nothing else. That's all she's got. No pretties, no nothing. So she loves it. She doesn't have to faff because her mum's put too many layers on a bed. So I spent the whole day yesterday, you know, I know how to live. We moved her into the flat on Friday, and then on Saturday I spent all day, because the weather's glorious, washing every piece of bedding known to man in the house. Don't ask me why I insisted on doing it all in one day, but I did, because the weather was nice. I thought, oh, I'll get it over and done with. And then today I thought, oh, I'll garden. After about an hour I was shattered. Oh, that'll teach me just making beds and tidying. But, you know, all this so that your daughter's comfy in her new little pad. So there you go. She's moved in with a friend from work. They both work in the city, so in Manchester City. So I'm sure they'll have lots of fun times. Watch this space to see if she moves back for a third time, because she was in London before that. It's all eventful here, you know, in this house. So let's just, there we go. So I've now got, so you can easily fast forward over that waffle. So now, if I want to, I can add the flower. You can even add, oh yeah, it was like that, wasn't it? So you can add the flower, if you wish, just over here, just to give more dimension if you want. But you see, I'm a great believer in looking at your card, your project. And for me, it seems a little bit of a shame to hide that heart. I know it's a pain watching me cut something out, because this can go on this frame like so. I can colour it in red and it can go on that frame, so I can create a card with that. Or the other one that we created, I can add this to there if I want, but it just seems a shame to hide the heart, so I don't like doing that. So I will probably place it on there with adding some stenciling in the background. So it's never wasted, but for me, I like to do that just to see if that, you know, if it's going to add anything to the project. And for me, it doesn't add anything to the project, it actually detracts from the project, so I'm not going to do that. What we're going to do now is just grab, where are we? My other stamp set, and I'm going to use my Bright Dawn, because what I can do then is I can add my little roosters to the bottom of the project without detracting too much, because I don't want to add too much. You also have to be aware in projects, you know, when you're adding too much or there isn't enough, that there has to be a time when you say no. You see, I don't even want to add the circles. It's funny, isn't it? You just know from a project what works. Do I want it there or there? I think I'm going to have it there, because my heart is slightly more that way. So I'm just going to add it here. So we'll just add those to my background. And you have to remember that you're adding that to a background that's got oxide inks on there. So you need to be aware that obviously that's not going to be as absorbent. Now it's got those layers of ink on there. So just add that there. So just give that time just to soak in there. And never rush the process. There we go. So we'll worry about them later, and we can ground them shortly. But for me, we need a little bit more colour on those hearts now that we've given it a little bit of time just to rest. So I'm going to pick up some more of that pigment. And in real life, trust me, I've definitely got more pigment on there and more depth of colour. Just definitely gives it a little bit more depth. Just adding that in there. And I think it's worthwhile just taking your time. Now that's the strongest colour. So we'll just rinse that brush, take off the excess water, and then we'll come back in with the more orange just to blend out those edges. And you can see that I've left it lighter towards the edges of the petal. There we go. I just want to check my colours again. Let's just grab a look at the colours. What colour is this? There's a colour here called Sugar Plum, and I'm just going to pick a little bit up and just add a little bit of the Sugar Plum. This is called Sugar Plum 0715, and I'm just going to add it just to the very sort of this area here, just so that it's got more depth, just to, there we go. So it is exactly that, it's a plummy colour. Let's just blend, just giving it a little bit more depth. Now, don't rush your processes, just take your time. If you've got the time to craft for a day, then make the most of it. Don't sort of, you know, rush your project too much. So what I'm going to do now, let me just have a look at my hearts. I'm going to take a little bit, I'm going to use cut and dry because it'll allow me to get in there a little better, and I'm going to use this old paper. Let me see if I've got a piece that hasn't, because old paper's a little bit different than that citrusy green. So I'm just going to pick up the old paper ink. Just, you can see, you need to make sure that you've got, you know, a good layer of ink on there. And what I'm going to do is just add a few little hearts just on the background with the old paper. Let's just lift that up. So it just gives a little bit of the hearts just to the background. Just so you can see, you've just got a few hearts just added in the background. So I can continue just adding, let's find the smaller hearts. Let's just add these two here. You can use your little, what do you call them? Stipple brushes to get in the smaller areas as well, if you wish. Let's just add a heart here. So it's just adding little hearts just around your background, just so that you can see those there. What I'm going to do is just find that one, just add a little bit more darkness. That one, just so that you can see that. That's it. Just to give me a few of those hearts in the background. I'm going to add a little bit of shading just underneath my little roosters, and again I just sort of almost just sort of kiss the background, just so that it just so they're just got a little bit of grounding. So what I'm going to do now, you've got the grey in the background and you've got the heart in the background. Now you've got these roosters on here that are in the black, and what I'm going to do is just add a little bit of black just in the background, just to add a pop of life just to the background. That doesn't mean cover all the layers of grey up, just add a little touch of the black here and there, just to echo the black with the roosters, just so that it doesn't look like you've just plonked something on there. Right. You really need now to make sure this is dry. Obviously when you're on your own, you can just make sure that you let it dry naturally. So I'm just going to heat the heat tool up, and I'm just going to give that a dry, because you can't do any work on the top, you know, with your pens or your gel pens or anything, unless it's totally dry. And it always looks better when you spend a little bit of time sort of allowing things to dry, and you then build the layers. I don't know whether I took the gel pen downstairs. I think I did, the one that worked. So let's see if we can get one of these working. Isn't it typical? Let me just... The gel pen that worked for me downstairs. I don't like how it's... I haven't got any... Come on. Oh, I can't be doing with the scratching on there. Let's see how many gel pens we can go through before we find one that works. I usually not use my Sigma ones. I don't think this is a Sigma one. Patience, patience, patience. There you go, Sigma one. Love the Signo ones. I love them. So what I'm going to do is just add some of the white detail. Just. And if you let things dry, it definitely works a lot better. It just looks better with some touches of the white on there. And I can tell, you can tell this ink here is dry compared to the red, because now when you start to use your gel pen on some moisture, it affects the pen. So you do have to be aware of that. You do need to let things dry, because the moisture just gets to the pen. This ink should be dry. Just adding a little bit of detail to the rooster. We'll just give that a little bit of time to dry while we find a sentiment. Let your dreams blossom. And I'm going to place this onto a piece of white card. So let's place the roosters back, just so that I've got that. This sentiment is from the rooster set, the Bright Dawn. I've got a disgusting piece of white. And you can tell I'm not rushing this at all. I'm just taking my time. There we go. Grab your card, Tracy. There it is. Let's move that on one side. And let's just... If I stamp that against a straight edge, it really helps me to get the sentiment straight. Just place that on there so we don't lose that sentiment. That's it. And when I'm cutting a sentiment, I often go quiet. It's the concentration, you see. Doesn't take much for me to need to concentrate, trust me. Oh, there's a lovely breeze coming through the window now. So I'm then going to add probably that there. Let me see. You see, I love looking through camera because for me it doesn't work there. I prefer it here because it's a balance with the roosters. So I'm going to add it there. And I'm going to add some black Posca pen around the edges. And just give that a little bit of time just to dry. I like to mop up that black. That's because Tracy gets in a total mess if she uses black paint or anything. So I'm just bring this in, and then let's see, that will be added here, which works nicely. We'll just add that just here so we can still see our heart, but it just doesn't detract from our heart, whereas the flower, it just broke the heart up and there was no point having the heart there because it just broke it up too much for me. And I still personally think that you can add a little bit more of the darker colour of the Inktense pencil, just to give a little bit more depth. You don't even have to water that out, just brings a little bit more depth to the design for me. That's why I always think it's important just to have the patience, just to take your time. And what we'll do is, I don't think I was going to say that this is going to work with the white, but touch wood, it seems to be working okay. I just think that white just brings a little bit of brightness. And I would say go over a couple of times with the white, just so that you can see. Now we're going to place this onto a black mat, just so that you can see that. Black mat always makes a big difference. Just add this, because I don't mind that I'm going to add the splatters after, if some of the splatters go onto the black mat, because that's just part of the design. Now the card has had moisture on there, so it does want to work against you a little bit. So let's just make sure that we've got that in line. I do faff a little bit with that being in line. Just make sure it's stuck down. Just spend a few minutes. And your card, apart from the sentiment, is completely flat. And then I'm going to get my micron pen. I spend my life testing pens, whether they work. And what I'm going to do is just add a little bit of doodle just around. Do your best doctor's signature. You can do it whichever way you want. You can just do made up words as long as you do your doctor's signature. Just around the heart, just to give that some squiggles around there. I'm just going to add just a little bit of scribbling just around the sentiment. There we go. Just a little bit of scribbling around there. And then I'm going to add my white poster pen and just add the splatters. Try not to aim for your sentiment or just cover your sentiment up. So this was a 4 by 6 inch card. And we're going to add this to a 5 by 7 card blank, so it'll have a bigger border just so that it echoes the white in the heart, but it's a bigger border than I normally leave. Normally I've got 1/4 of an inch with my layers. That's 1/2 inch difference, because you've got the card that we worked on was 4 by 6, then the mat was 4 1/4 by 6 1/4 in the black, and then the card blank is 5 by 7. It's nice just to change it up a little bit, just so that your card, and I still may add more depth just to that card blank, but I just think that's lovely, and I'm glad I didn't put the flower on so that we detracted from the heart. Let's just bring in this border we created with the 5 by 7, because isn't that lovely? Just with that border, that's just a lovely background. So what I'm going to do, let's just grab a piece of acetate, which I happen to have, and let's grab some of the salvage patina, just a little bit of the salvage patina, just to add to this splodgy background that we created off the gel press. And let's just add a little bit more of that colour, just a little bit more of the splodge, a little bit of the old paper, which now seems to be a favourite. Can you tell I'm not using much colour? And if I've got the squares on the acetate, just move that colour around. And then you can just add some of those splodges just to your background. Just because, as if we just designed it like that. Of course we did. We designed it like that. There we go. And then I'm going to give that a dry. Now I always recommend that if you can let it dry naturally, that's always better. And sometimes you don't have to overcrowd something. You know, you can have it quite simple. It doesn't have to be overcrowded. Just heat it from the other side, just to help it, you know, straighten out. A little bit of too much moisture there. And again. Let's just straighten that out a bit. So then we've got, in real life, I can actually see more hints of the old paper around the background, but I've only done it very subtly. But in real life, you will see that that is actually there. So just using the stamps we've used before, we're going to use that Morning Mist and the Paper Leaves stamp set. And I'm just going to, where am I going to have the flower? Shall we have it this side? Yeah. So let's just stamp some of the background just here. Just some of that background. Just so we've got it in there, just so that it looks a bit like a little bit of a vintage garden encyclopedia, because then if you put the flower over the top, you're going to see some of that text, so it'll give it that sort of vintage encyclopedia look. So just because something's got a flower on doesn't mean you can't just use parts of the image. Not at all. I'm just using the bits of text here. I'm just going to elongate that text, and I'm doing a longer session than normal because I have some ladies who love the longer videos. So, and also just to, you know, carry on from my snippets, I'd just like to explain things completely fully and go through everything. Let me just see. So that's going to go there. So I want to elongate it a little bit more. And you do not, you know, I love, you know me by now, I love adding lots of layers. But that doesn't mean we have to do it every single time. We can also keep it quite simple as well. But that for me just makes it, when we colour it, makes it look sort of very botanical. Right, let's colour this now. So we'll add our ready colour, which I think is a ready orange. It's Persian red. So I'm going to add that Persian red. And if your stem is curling a bit, just manipulate it so that it stays flat. So I'm just adding that colour first. Now, if you want your image to have a little bit of shine, you can leave a white area sort of central here, just so that it sort of shines a bit. So I'll show you what I mean. So add a bit of colour there, bit of colour on the edge. So just scribbling a little bit of colour on the edge. Right, then we'll just add a little bit of the orange just to blend those colours. So what we can do, let me just, a little bit of orange there. Right, I can bring the water in. What you should never do is put your water brush down. So just give that, excuse me, a little bit of a rinse. What I'm going to do this time is just push everything to the centre. All the pigment to the centre. Just blend the two colours. So all the darkness is in the centre. Take that off and just come in and just blend a bit of that colour. So I added a bit of colour at the edges. And if you don't want to add your white, you can leave the white area yourself. So I'm going to add a little bit more of that red. little bit more again. And all we're doing is building that depth of colour, just to build up the layers. There we go. And pick up moisture again. Just blend out a little bit more of the colour. And what I'm doing is, this time I'm leaving a little bit of a white area, only very subtle, just because then it'll give a little bit of shine to the flower. So you can colour it so many different ways. So let's pick up a little bit of that pigment and just add a little bit more darkness. Just pick up that pigment. So I'm just leaving the lightness sort of in the centre-ish across the flower, but just adding a little bit more colour. There's so many different ways that you can colour your flowers. So you can either add the white afterwards, or you can actually leave the white. It's entirely up to you. And then I'm going to add a little bit of that dark colour, the colour I can't remember, sugar plum. Just going to pick up a little bit of that, just to add a little bit of the sugar plum. I sometimes leave a project overnight and I actually come back and add another layer of colour. I just think it's worth it, just to faff a little bit more. So I'm just adding a little bit of that dark colour, that sugar plum, just around the edges as well. So, you know, colouring's very therapeutic, and I know colouring is not for everyone, but I think, you know, every now and then it's lovely just to... Now that's a very rich colour, so let's just give that a little bit of a clean. And I've been on for a while now, but I hope you don't mind, because I just like to make sure I cater for everybody. What's that? A bit more colour. Wipe it up with your fingers, Tracy, and then smear your fingers everywhere. Let's pick up that colour, and I'm just going to go back to the red and just add a little bit more of the red, just to blend that a little bit more. And honestly, the times that I go back and forth adding colour, I can't tell you. When you see me wipe off everything from my brush, I just wipe off all the colour. And obviously my white gel pen's not going to go straight on there, but it just gives it a little bit of brightness by leaving a bit of white. Now if you haven't left the white, it doesn't matter, because you can just add that white in. You can just go in and add a little touch of white. But obviously I'm not going to be able to add that to that soaking wet area. But when you add to your background, your nice simple background, it just adds enough. just to that backdrop. So what I'm going to do is add a little bit of pin flare or ultra thick gel medium. I heard somebody say on TV the other day that, I can't remember now, that it's very wasteful to squeeze it from the tube like this. You should use the syringe. Let me just be honest with you, I can't be bothered. You know, I use it how I like to use it. I don't need the syringe, but everybody's different. So, you know, if you think it's wasteful, that's fine. You can just put yours in a syringe. There we go. Just add this to here. And what you've done is you're making a card from a piece that was just the mop-up of the border, and you've still got this piece left that you created as well. But it's a mop-up piece, this is, from the border. Now let's just make sure that brush is clean. Now if you've got a piece, if you've got some water just at this on the side, that works really well. Obviously I come up and I create sometimes and I don't get things ready. So what I'm doing is I'm using the grey just to add a little bit of shadow just down the edges, and you can see me just taking the excess off now before I sort of blend that out. Just taking that excess. So I sort of blend with almost a dry brush. So then I can take my little roosters, and this time I'll just add one. You were facing the wrong way. It's that one, isn't it? Yep. So I'm just going to take one of the roosters this time. Just add the rooster. And this will stamp over the top because we've stamped that with grey ink underneath. So this can stamp over the top because we're using that black ink. So it works quite nicely. Again, if like me, you're messing with the stamps, just make sure that you just wipe your hands. Just to add a little bit of shading just underneath, just to a little bit under the flower. There we go. And then whilst this dries a little bit, I'm just going to add a little bit of the bulb Gazette like we did on the other one. Just to add a bit of the black just to the background. Have I got a little? Don't want to add, I think that's enough. I don't want to add too much to the background. The gel pen. Obviously, really, you would let the flower dry and you would work on a flat surface once it's dry and put your white highlights and then stick it on the card. Sometimes when you're demonstrating, you do things the opposite way round than you may do at home just because of demonstration purposes. Now what I'm going to do is just add a black mat. And this is a faux mat because I'm going to cut the card live so that we've got the card and we can see. Let's just clean that up. Don't want getting in a mess. Clean that up. And again, I'm just going to go over that because it's not quite good enough. So now I'm just adding a faux mat to the card. There we go. Let's get rid of that. So that's just adding a faux mat, and we'll just let that dry a few moments. you know, sometimes less is more. It doesn't always have to be overly packed with detail. What I'm going to do now is just cut a card. So that was 5 by 7. Make sure that's straight. And what I've done, I'm going to let that black dry a little bit, but what I've done is I've got a card blank now, 5.5 by 7.5, which we'll add shortly. So I'm going to see if I can add a little bit of white just to make that pop a little bit more. Just makes it pop a little bit more. And then when you add this to a mat, which is very simple, doesn't have to be overly complicated at all, I can just keep it like that. There's a heart that I like as well. I wonder if it's on the pheasants. Let me just grab. Be the pheasant one. Yeah, you see the heart dangling from the pheasant here. Just thought of that then. So on the pheasant stamp, let's just grab the pheasant. And you ask yourself why I end up with stuff everywhere. So I'm just going to use this pheasant bit. I just want the heart on the pheasant. There we go. I'm just going to hold that on. I'm just going to there we go. Let's just use the pen just to join those lines. At the top, just lift my flower a bit so it isn't too flat. Let's move that pheasant. There's always little bits on your stamps that can make your project look a little bit different. So there's always ways. There we go. And just a little bit of shading around the heart. Just so that looks a little bit 3D. There we go. Just a little bit of shading around the heart so that looks a little bit 3D. And then I'm going to add this to the 5.5 by 7.5 inch card blank. I need a word as well. Let's just... And when your card's a little bit, you know, when you've added lots of moisture and it, you know, it's bending a bit, you know, it's curved or whatever, make sure you add enough adhesive to the back, so in the middle of the card as well, so that that just grabs a hold. And you just need to give it a few minutes just for it to grab. So I just want a little bit of text to go on there, but just so you can see, it just works beautifully. It doesn't have to be over complicated. That does have to have a little bit more shading though. There we go. and then we'll add our splatters, and then I'll get the word. So just add a few splatters. There we go. And then we'll get our Cosmos wording just on there. So use the Cosmos, which is on the flower trio. We'll add that to a spare piece of card. And again, if I stamp against that edge, will help me to keep it straight. You don't have to press too hard. Cosmos goes there. And this is why it takes me several hours to clean up all the stuff. So sometimes less is more. Cutting straight is overrated. Right. Now I don't want it there. So it's going there. So let's add that Cosmos. And we'll highlight it with a little bit of shading with the grey. And then I can show you the two cards together. Go. We'll just add a little bit of shading, you know. Obviously, sharpening your pencil is usually a good idea. Tracy just never gets round to it. Nothing like making things difficult for yourself. Then just grab a little bit of the moisture. Take off that excess. I'll turn the card just to grab and just take off the excess again, just to blend that out. So again, almost a dry brush. And then what you've done is created a card from your leftovers. So you've got your first card from your gel press, and I explained everything about the gel press process and why, just so you can see that. And then the clean and simple card, just so you can see that. So I hope you've enjoyed both those. Let's put them in the moisture. So I hope you've enjoyed both of those, and I hope I answered all the questions. Love to all, and I'll see you all soon. Bye for now.